NTT Data has 190,000 people globally. They do $30 billion of revenue, and you've probably never even heard of this company. They do unbelievable work. They're one of the largest tech companies in the world. $18 billion of their revenue is actually outside of Japan. They've consolidated all of their companies together, and they're going to be a powerhouse going forward. We did a recording with John Lombard, the CEO for APAC at NTT Data. Unbelievable conversation. You have to listen to the whole thing. Here it is now. John, I cannot thank you enough for coming on this show. Before we start, let's give our listeners a little bit of your background for some context.
Hey, Michael, thanks for having me on. Great to see you. Look, I'll try and keep this part as short as possible, but my background is I'm Australian, based out of Singapore, running NTT Data for the Asia Pacific region. But early on in my career, I worked in consulting for PwC. Then I was with KPMG for a number of years. I worked at SAP for about a decade. And I've also run a sort of a mid-size, mid-cap publicly listed company in Australia. I did that as a bit of a change from being in sort of the tech and consulting industry. Had nothing to do with this industry at all. It was all about business advisory and wealth management. Did that for a number of years in Australia. I wanted to get that experience of running a public company. And then in 2016, joined the NTT group running, at the time, a company called Dimension Data here in Asia Pac, and have been in the group for the last 9 years.
Awesome. What a great background. I like to ask the guys and gals that have been in consulting companies, right? Because I think it's a really fascinating way to start your career. It's this way to learn about business at scale, right? Do you want to talk about what you take from that consulting experience then into the rest of your business experience, if that's okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's nothing that teaches you more quickly than working in a consulting business. You get thrown into all sorts of situations, particularly when you're younger. So you go in there with very little experience, and you're put into an organization, and because you carry the brand of a large organization, you often get this expectation from the client that you'll sort of know everything. What I really loved about it was a number of things. One, it was the sort of the multi-industry aspect. You get to work in all sorts of industries. I did some work in a chemical, a nuclear reactor facility that created medical isotopes. I got to work for manufacturing businesses, in financial services. But the other aspect is working in different parts of the world. So at a very young age, I had an opportunity to work overseas. So I worked for a number of years in Indonesia, and I was there during, and this will give my age away a bit to the listeners, but I was there in 1998. And for those who understand their history of that part of the world, it was at a time when the government collapsed. So the Indonesian government collapsed. It was an era called reformasi, and there was a change in government, etc. So that was a really interesting period to be living away from Australia for the first time.
Yeah, I think it really, look, I did the same thing, right? When I was 24 years old, I left New York. I was working for Morgan Stanley, and I moved to Japan. And, just like you, built businesses in Korea, in Hong Kong, in Australia as well. And I think getting that international experience changed my perspective in a way that I think never would have been possible if I'd just stayed in Manhattan, which is a cool place, but not as worldly maybe as they think it is. I'm curious if it changed your perspective as well.
Exactly the same. So exactly the same experience. I mean, I'm grew up in a country town in Australia. So went to high school and university in Melbourne. Then going into at an early age, sort of similar age to you, going and working in places like in Thailand, in Indonesia, in Singapore, throughout Southeast Asia at a very young age. Was a massively eye-opening experience for me, and actually it really did force me to just consider different types of cultures, different styles of working, being adaptable, being flexible, knowing when to speak, but also when to listen as well. So really important experiences at an early age, and it really, I think, set me up well for the types of roles I did later on in my career.
Yeah.
There isn't anything that I haven't, probably much like yourself, there isn't anything that I haven't sort of seen or experienced, and nothing actually surprises me or shocks me anymore based on that experience.
So I want to get into NTT Data in a second, but I do want to make this point that
Sure.
the luxury, right, of having seen multiple cycles, not just in one place, but in multiple places, allows, I think, management, particularly at the CEO level, to say, I've seen this before on a different surface. I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen, but I kind of know like the three potential things that could happen based on the things that I've already seen. And I think that type of experience alone is enough to make somebody like a great leader, right? Because you at least have the frame of reference for how to make good decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And, obviously the recent one that comes to mind is, the coronavirus that hit us
Yeah.
all. And you'll recall there was, we had bird flu back in the day,
SARS.
in SARS across Asia Pacific. We had the global financial crisis that hit us. There's always
Yeah.
something. And those things, having been through all of those and having had the discussion at the time about, so what are we going to do now, and how do we respond to this? How do we react? I think it just, like anything in life, the more experience you have, the better you are to be able to make hopefully the right decisions. When you need
Yeah.
to make decisions on investment, on, do we continue to recruit and hire? How are we going to operate the business? How quickly can we get people working from home? All of the things I'm sure you've talked many times to, over the journey to other people. But these are things that, you only get often through that experience.
Completely agree. Look, I want to talk about, you said earlier that you were part of the NTT Data family. You said earlier there was Dimension Data. It's kind of merged in together. Maybe you want to talk about why the merger, the combination, actually, the integration took place at this scale, and what you think the implications are for the company itself and its future objectives.
Yeah, look, maybe some of the people watching and listening have heard of NTT, maybe know a little bit about it, but I really do think we fly under the radar from a technology services and IT services perspective. I really think that's something that we need to do a much better job of getting our story out there. So often people may have experienced NTT. I mean, I joined a company called Dimension Data. There's a company, business operations called NTT Data and NTT Limited, and we had over 30 different companies operating as NTT companies globally. So it created. I always tell the story. A friend of mine, I won't name the company, but is the APJ president of a very large software business, one of the biggest, would call me up and say, "John, I've got this question for you. Which NTT should I be talking to?" And often our clients would say the same thing. We would create some confusion in the market because of just the number of brands we had. So we've been on this journey, Michael, since over the last X number of years, actually starting in 2019, when we brought together all of the sort of wholly owned subsidiaries of NTT outside of Japan together to create NTT Limited. But there was also this NTT Data business that was operating as well. So on the 1st of April this year, we actually brought together NTT Data and Limited to create one global IT services company. So we're part of the NTT Data group. So overall, the business size is around $30 billion. The NTT Data international part of that business is $18 billion. So we're a significant business outside of Japan in our own right. And it was just important to create that really simple message to our clients. We can now offer the full capability of services through infrastructure and application under one brand in one organization.
Look, I like to say I lived in Japan from 1990 until the end of 2011, right? Right after the equity bubble or the economic bubble in Japan burst. And I think back then you saw the Japanese companies trying to expand overseas in a way that was very what's the right word? Super, super aggressive. And you have companies now, I think, that are doing it in a much more what's the right word? Moderated and yet much more in a much better way. And I think NTT Data is a really great example of this, right? By consolidating all of the companies together, like you said, under the radar. I don't know how a company with $30 billion in revenue and almost 200,000 employees can be under the radar, but with this kind of really moderated, I won't say rollout, but building of that business outside of Japan at $18 billion seems like a really good strategy at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, and absolutely. And what I really enjoy about working in the organization is that there is very much, as you would have experienced in your time in Japan, a very strategic focus. And some people mistake that as, oh, it's long term and, it takes too long for things to happen. Actually, we've moved really quickly on this. It's
Yeah.
part of this sort of transformation that we're going through, and really with purpose. So this is not something that was just sort of decided at the last minute. As you would probably expect, it's been in the works for some time. We've been working through this transition and this transformation, and it's really been done with purpose. And I've got to say, at speed. So, and the ability for us to execute in the field to really make things happen is another, I think, hallmark of the business, and something that for me, is really important personally. That we have an opportunity to drive this change and the transformation. But it's a really exciting place to be at the moment, and we're one of the largest IT services businesses now globally, and certainly in this
In the
region.
world, right?
We operate 14 countries. We've got often case not hundreds but thousands of people. In Thailand, for example, just to give an example, where well over 1,500 people on the ground. In Singapore, we're at 2,000. Obviously in India, we're tens of thousands, but we really invest heavily in those markets, and that's a real differentiator, I think, for us compared to many of the other global systems integrators.
Yeah, and I want to make the point that I didn't want to say that you weren't operating at speed, but there was a rushing that was going on in the 90s, right? And one of my teachers in high school, I'll never forget it. He always said, "It's good to move fast, but don't be in a rush," right? And it's a different kind of mentality. And I love this fact of moving at speed.
Hold on.
So if I look at this, if I look at this from a customer perspective, how does it look differently from customers, right? You said you integrated all these things together. If I'm a client, remember before you said your friend said, "Who am I dealing with?" How does it look differently to me if I'm a client today?
Yeah. So today, and look, full transparency, we're going through this transition as we speak. So we're moving through this year with this sort of integration and transformation. But if you're a client of ours, instead of having somebody from NTT Limited and somebody from NTT Data and maybe from another operating company present themselves to you as, "Hey, I'm from the NTT organization or NTT Data," you've got one client manager, one client executive representing the whole portfolio. And then what we're doing, Michael, is we're having specialization. So specialists that will come in to support, depending on whether maybe it's a network modernization piece, maybe it's a discussion around cybersecurity, maybe it's a conversation around an SAP upgrade or an application development, or how do I use the AI tools to support my development efforts, etc. So we'll provide those specialists to that client executive. So it's an obvious thing to say, but it's one face to the client, but bringing through all of that different capability.
Yeah, again, you may say it's an obvious thing to say, right? But actually doing it, and I love the fact that you're in the process of it, because it makes this conversation so much more relevant, right, to the listeners, because they can actually talk to somebody who's doing the thing now, right? You can feel it as it's going on, and I think that's super important. I want to talk, if you don't mind, a little bit about the elephant in everybody's room, which is artificial intelligence. I think you just mentioned it as well.
Yes.
What does a big integrated tech company like NTT Data do? How does it invest in AI? How does it roll it out to its clients? What are some of the applications where you see your clients using it today and over the next 3 to 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, look, it is the absolute conversation that everyone's having at the moment. It's still very much a conversation. Like we're starting to see projects emerge. What we've seen over the last 6 months is lots of discussion, lots of training, but not large scale deployments of real Gen AI at scale. So, and look, you'll always find examples that people will talk to, but they're often proof of concepts or prototypes that they're working on. So the first thing that we did as an organization is we said we need to learn about this ourselves. We need to make sure we're educating ourselves. There are very few experts. There aren't many organizations that are at scale with this capability. So this is definitely an area where we've just sort of been investing in our own capability. So that's one thing. So, thousands of people in our organization trained on AI fundamentals, on different tooling, on how to have that conversation with the client, etc. So, including myself, I did an MIT online course on the business application of AI. So, you've got to you must invest in your own skills, because you won't find lots of experts in the field at the moment. I think that will come. We have a view at NTT Data that the sort of first wave of real AI use will be human-led, AI supported. So, until we get to that, that mythical, artificial AGI or artificial general intelligence, there's still a role for human involvement in this space. There'll be, of course, roles and different types of skills that will be completely taken out by the use of Gen AI. But for example, if you're a developer or a coder, the best coders today are still very much humans. AI can do tons of support around productivity, helping streamline, improving the accuracy of code and the quality of code. But if you think of that real intuitive understanding, that deep knowledge, it's the good news, Michael, it's still us for now. But at some point it will become, it'll be AI-led,
I'm releasing an episode today for
supported.
Yeah. So I'm releasing an episode today for one of my other podcasts, InsurTech Amplified. Nice little plug there for myself. And one of the things that Andrew Johnson says, he's the head of InsurTech at Gallagher Re. One of the things he says is that AI is great for processing data, doing stuff that's rote, right? But humans understand the nuances and the subtleties that AI still can't understand yet, and may not ever, because it gets to these edge conditions where a human is like, I've seen this 1,000 times before, and I just know that this thing is going to be that thing. And I agree with you. I think a lot of these experiences are going to end up being hybrid experiences as well, where the AI, and we saw this actually when I was at Goldman Sachs, right, on the algorithmic trading desk. The clients at the end of the day loved the fact that the algo was doing the trading, but they still wanted to talk to me about why. Still, right? And I think that that's exactly what you're suggesting. A couple more things. I love the fact that you took this course at MIT. There's nothing better than senior leadership still learning, right? It's so great. And it's a super great example, actually, for people that work with you and for you. We talked about cycles. And I'm curious if you think that this AI cycle rhymes in a way with any other previous cycles. The thing that comes to mind for me is Linux. We have to have it, but how do we use it kind of thing? It's not the same scale per se, but I'm wondering if it reminds you of anything else, particularly in the rollout phase where you're just people are talking about it, but not doing it yet, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So yes and no. So I was having this conversation with my children the other day. They were asking me, Dad, so, what's this like? Is this like the internet? Is this like the growth in cybersecurity or, whatever, 5G? 5G is another example where, there's been this sort of hype build around 5G, but a lot of telcos are really struggling to monetize. So that's probably maybe 5G is the closest. I genuinely believe, Michael, this is more fundamental. This is an electricity light bulb moment, I believe. I think, what is it, Amara's law that sort of says, we tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and underestimate it maybe in the midterm. I think think it's maybe like that. I think it's going to be so transformational, but there's a lot of just sort of people dabbling, learning at the moment. And I'm sure there's people listening, watching, who are saying, no, we're moving at scale. So I think it'll happen, but it's going to happen we're going to really start to see it maybe in sort of 2026, 27, and 24, 25 is going to be this transitional understanding, learning, building the skills period. I think, I could be wrong. Let's see how it plays out. But it's an electricity moment in my view.
So I think you are 100% right. And actually, I'm making a note to myself to steal that from you from now on. Because if you go back and you think about it, electricity kind of manifested itself at scale in the first way with light bulbs, right? So people are like, no more candles, things won't burn down anymore. We'll just have light whenever
Yeah,
we want it. And yet,
yeah,
even today, electricity is changing the way we drive, the way we fly, the way we use our cell phones. It's still there doing things that we
yeah,
could never have anticipated 150 years ago,
yeah.
whatever, right? And I think that AI is the
That's
same
it.
thing. You're right. You're still right, though. And I hadn't thought about it that way. It's going to be integrated into everything that we do, right? In the same way that our own intelligence, like whether we're playing sport, whether we're watching television, whether we're doing anything, our brain is still working. And I think AI is going to be the same way. It's always going to be there. It's going to be permanent and persistent. And I think that's going to change the way we do everything that we do without the human element going away. How do you, again, I kind of joked a little bit about you doing that MIT course, and it's really great that like senior leadership continues to learn. But as new stuff that's transformational, like AI, rolls out in a company of that does $18 billion outside of Japan, how do you filter that idea down to the rest of the organization that this is a big thing? We all need to know about it. Literally, from like the guy that sweeps the floor to the guy that runs the whole thing. How do you build that into everybody's day to day so they can learn more about this?
Yeah, it's just it's communication, constant communication. I don't think you can over communicate on these things. We talk about it
Yeah,
internally all the time. We celebrate the examples of where people have developed a product or a tool or a capability or trained. I posted stuff on LinkedIn when I did the course to share. I share it with people internally.
I love it.
We have to communicate and just encourage and give people. The other thing is giving them the time and the permission to say, listen, part of what we expect in a career in somebody developing is you will take the time to learn, but we'll also give you that time and
Yeah.
and we'll celebrate it with you when you achieve something. So I think that's really important that you just allow people to invest in themselves and make that part of their career journey in an organization. Super important.
Do you travel around a lot? I mean, you're in Melbourne now. You're based in Singapore, but I'm curious if you
Yeah.
still travel around a lot to visit other offices, and you'll probably do that even more now, right? That this consolidation or integration has taken place. Yeah.
Yeah, so this year, for the first time in my life, I have started to track. Normally, I didn't want to know because I travel too much. I'm actually tracking how much travel I'm doing.
Oh,
So,
tell me.
so far this year, I'm happy to share with. I'm not sure if I'm happy or not actually, but I've done 45 flights, and I'm 6/10 on the way to the moon. I'm a bit of an Apollo, nerd, so I'm
I can
six
see in
tenths
the
on the way to the
background.
moon. Yeah, I'm not trying to achieve that goal. It's just that, to your point, I've been traveling a lot, particularly to go and meet the teams. I came from the NTT Limited part of the business, not NTT
Yeah.
Data, even though my background is more the application side and the software side. But it is really important to me and has been just to get out and meet the people. You can't beat spending time in front of people, getting to know people, interacting with people.
Yeah.
You can do it like we are here, but nothing beats face to face.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say when we first started at Morgan Stanley doing these digital calls, and this is back in the early to mid '90s. It was cool, but nothing beat like when the senior management would come out to Tokyo and just sit there and take us out to dinner and
Yeah,
talk to us. It just made us feel so much more important and so much more substantial. Yeah, I think it's super
absolutely.
important. This gets back to the communication you were talking about before, right? It's just so
And
important. Yeah.
100%. I think that's also, we're seeing that now in our offices. We can see that we're getting better sort of interaction, much
Yeah.
better energy when people are spending more time in the office than at home. And I'm not suggesting that people shouldn't. There are times when people need to work from home, can work from home, but I think we're maybe over rotated a bit. I know that we're certainly encouraging people
Yeah.
where they can, where it makes sense, to come and spend time with their friends and colleagues in the office. We're just getting much better. We get much better engagement when we have people together in that environment. It's really obvious in our business.
Yeah, and again, I'll go back to a conversation I had with a guy named Yashish Daya, who runs a big company in India, a big insurtech company in India. And one of the things that he said was post-COVID, and this was literally post, right? So after countries started
Yeah,
opening up, is that people actually had a real desire to go back to the office, to see the people they loved working with, to be more
yeah,
productive, and do all those things. And frankly, I have a studio in my house, but I'd much rather come to this studio, work with my
yeah,
team. It just feels like more to me. And again, I'm not making a value judgment, just like you. I'm saying, sure, if you need to be at home on Monday because this thing, that thing, the other thing, do that for sure. But at some point, you miss that human interaction. I think it's back to this hybrid thing we talked about before. It's super important. And I miss that camaraderie of like going up to the 48th floor in Roppongi Hills and
yeah,
seeing the 400 people I used to
yeah,
work with. That was awesome. Yeah.
yeah. 100,
Anyway.
absolutely, absolutely, so important.
Can we talk a little bit about, with a tech company as big as NTT Data, there's a sustainability, I think, thing to talk about as well. Do you want to talk about how
Yeah,
important that sustainability is, particularly in the context of all these technologies, to you and to NTT Data as an entity?
yeah, absolutely. So this is a huge issue, not just for NTT Data, but also for the industry, and that is the consumption of energy, particularly as with this growth in artificial intelligence. And depending,
Yeah.
there's different sort of measurements and ways of looking at this. The best one or read recently was that the average data set for a Gen AI system, so the average processing requirement or energy requirement for the average data set is the equivalent of 1 hour's output of a nuclear power plant, and which is, to me, is just extraordinary. And of course, it's,
Yeah.
well, how big's the data set and how long does it run and all of those metrics. But if you just think of it, that it's massive energy consumption to process this data in those through those AI algorithms. So for us as NTT Data and the NTT group as a whole, it's really important that we do our bit and we look at new technologies. So there's a couple of things that we've been working on. One of them is a thing called, or a product called ION. It's an all photonic network technology. And in its simplest form, Michael, it's, if you think about optical technology, optical fiber technology, at some point when that hits a data center, it hits some other copper, or it slows down, it gets congested, and it
Yep.
needs massive amounts of energy then to process. So all photonic networks significantly, reduce the bandwidth requirements, and just allow processing at much faster speeds. So there is a significant increase in bandwidth, and there's a much better, much lower latency in terms of the processing time. So we're seeing many significant reductions in energy consumption utilizing this ION technology, so this all photonic network technology. The other one is that NTT has developed its own lightweight language model for called Suzumi. So it's a lightweight version of a large language model. So if you think about you know autonomous vehicles, maybe in a mining site or a manufacturing site, needing that rapid processing power at the edge. If you think about, maybe it's a government body that wants to containerize its data and not have it sort of shared into the broader, general
Yeah.
community. This type of technology is really useful, and of course has a lower power requirement than just throwing everything into a larger model. And we're also working with countries around how do we use um, sustainable sources of energy to power our data centers, because as being a large data center organization as well, we're one of the largest data center providers in the world. We need to constantly look at ways of how we can reduce consumption in those data centers. So we're looking at the wind, solar. We're looking at how we can use different technologies within the data center, different types of cooling technologies, and as I mentioned, the all photonic network technology as well, to just drive down that power consumption. So we've got a goal to be net zero in our extended supply chain by 2040, and in our own internal operations by by 2030. I mean, that's a big task. We can't do it without the support of, the energy providers and the countries in which we operate. We need those sources of renewable energies. We're not an energy company in our own right, so that's really important.
Yeah, but this is going to become actually super important. This idea of alternative energy running data centers. I think he was talking to somebody in Borneo, and this is maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, about
Yeah,
how they're running a lot of the data centers that get built there through hydropower, right? So it's there, the
yeah,
water's already there, and they can run all these data
yeah,
centers there, which is a great way to do it. Plus, they can use it for cooling and a whole bunch of other things, right? It really makes sense to
yes.
do this. Can we spend a little more time talking about these lightweight LLMs? Because I feel like, again, this gets back to the cyclicality and understanding cycles, right? You build this massive thing, right? Like ChatGPT, and it takes a while to build, and you just build this massive idea, and then people are like, yeah, that's great, but I only need like this little piece of it, because I don't need a trillion data points, right? Or parameters. I need 100,000, exactly as you said. Do you feel like this is the future of LLMs? Is maybe a little bit extreme, but that a lot of companies, big and small, are going to build their own things like this with maybe your help as well, and just say,
Yep.
we only want to have this in our private data center. This is going to be way more efficient, way faster, and way more specific just for us. This, I think, is going to happen at scale as well. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think many organizations are realizing, I think the risk you run of using these publicly available, if you like, large language models
Yeah.
is if you start training it for a particular piece of IP or a particular business, it'll end up in the public domain. So all of a sudden your
Yep.
differentiation is lost. The whole idea of
Yep.
ChatGPT is it hoovers up all of this information from that's publicly available, and then it can make informed decisions and recommendations, etc. So you don't want to do that if you're a business that really wants to protect your IP. You may want part of that information, but you want to sort of, if you like, containerize it or keep it in your own private data
Yeah.
center facility. So I think we will see that. There are, as I said, requirements to sort of source out and at times sort of go out into the larger world to gather information, but you will really want to protect IP, and we're certainly seeing organizations have that aha moment with when they think about how they're going to use this technology.
Yeah, I agree. Can we, before I let you go, can we talk about technology for social good, or just for good, if you don't mind, a little bit, right? With all of the persistence of tech, not just AI, but tech itself in every little corner, nook and
Yeah.
cranny of our lives, is there a way to ensure, not ensure, but like to just pay attention to the fact that some of this tech should be used for social good as well?
Yeah, look, and I think that we're talking about the use and the training around AI. I think it's really important that AI and this technology is available to everyone. The worst thing that could possibly, like electricity. I mean, electricity now is for most of the world's population has access to some electrical power source. And if we have to make the use of this technology exactly the same, if we start to have, groups of people or companies only having access to this type of technology, I think that's a massive mistake, because that's when you get people, imagining the worst case scenarios and what are they using it for, and all of this sort of negativity that surrounds it. And the more we can do, even across countries, across borders, giving all sorts of people access, I think is critical. And we certainly at NTT Data advocate for that very strongly, the open use, making this technology publicly available. I also think whenever we can, as tech companies, we should be doing things that improve, you talked about sustainability. I think traceability is the
Yep.
other thing. If you look at, we do something, for example, developed a product called IO-Trace, which is basically using blockchain technology to track and trace canned tuna. And I had no idea, but you really do want to know where your tuna comes from, it turns out. So this
Yeah.
technology, will look at where it's sourced from, how it's been transported, where it's packed. And you can scan the QR code on the tin, and it will give you that full traceability to make sure that it's been sourced from sustainable sources and it's not coming from some, it's from some location that is not sustainable, where they're dredging or whatever. So
Yeah.
just things like that, wherever we can, we should be using technology just to help people out. And this is something, and again, Michael, you'll probably be aware, it's a very much an NTT thing, is to invest in research and development, and not R&D that always has a business thing at the end of it. It's often just R&D for the sake of, we need to be investing in research that's for the greater good. We spend over $3 billion a year on R&D. We hold an R&D forum every November in Tokyo. We get clients and partners to attend. It's not a sales event. It really is just a showcase of all sorts of really interesting technologies, and most of those are available to the broader community.
Yeah, I mean, 10% of revenue for R&D, not a small number. Yeah, 3 billion into 30 billion. I want to make one final comment on electricity, and then I'll let you go. I did a recording last year with Ujjwal Deepdahal, right, who's the CEO of Drug Holdings in Bhutan. And one of the things about which he was most proud was the fact that Bhutan, which is very mountainous, very difficult terrain, is that 98% of the country is electrified. That was something that was really important to them. And just, it made me remember when you said that. We talked about electricity. This is the thing I'm going to talk about now from now on, at least in this context, is that everybody needs to have access to it, because if 50% of the population is, I'm going to put it in quotes, is in the dark, something's really wrong. Anyway, I really want to thank you for doing this. John Lombard, the CEO for APAC and NTT Data, you've got to come back. This was really great. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Michael.